My daughter-in-law's family looked down on me my whole life. They never said it out loud, but I could see it in the way they held their wine glasses when I walked into a room. On the night of their 25th anniversary party, I stopped on the highway to help a little girl having a seizure in the back seat of a wrecked car. By the time I reached the resort, I was 2 hours late, covered in blood and dirt, and my son's in-laws had security escort me out like I was trash. What happened next is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Before I tell you the rest, subscribe if stories like this still remind you there are decent people left in the world. The phone call came just after 8 on a Tuesday morning. My son Bradley never called that early, unless something was bothering him. His mother, Helen, used to tell him nobody should interrupt a man during his first cup of coffee, and even after 4 years without her, that habit still lived inside him. "Pop," he said carefully, "Whitney's parents are having their 25th anniversary party Saturday night. Big event at Sea Island." I already knew where this was going. Whitney wanted me there. Not her parents, not the people hosting the party, just Whitney. She'd spent nearly a decade trying to soften the distance between me and her family, but some people build walls so tall they stop seeing over them. The party was at the Cloister, one of those places where every chair probably cost more than my first truck. Bradley told me black tie wasn't necessary. "A sport coat will be fine for you," he said. He didn't mean anything by it, but the words still landed heavy. I'd worked 38 years for the Brunswick Water Department, started reading meters, ended supervising maintenance crews across the whole city. Honest work, hard work. But around Whitney's parents, men like me always felt like we'd shown up through the service entrance. Saturday afternoon, I polished my shoes on the porch while listening to a Braves game on an old transistor radio Helen bought me years ago. The blazer I wore had last seen daylight at her funeral. Before leaving, I slipped a check into an envelope for Whitney's mother's horse charity. $200. More than I should have spent, honestly. But Helen always believed generosity mattered more when nobody expected it. The drive south was peaceful, until traffic slowed near a curve along Highway 17. At first I thought it was another stalled car. Then I saw the SUV half buried in the grass. A woman stood barefoot in the road, waving desperately at passing traffic, while cars kept swerving around her without stopping. I pulled over immediately. The little girl in the back seat was seizing before I even reached the door. Foam at the mouth, body jerking violently, terrified mother crying so hard she could barely speak. And suddenly none of the fancy clothes or anniversary dinners mattered anymore. Her mother's name was Genevieve, and she was barely holding herself together. Between sobs she explained that a deer had jumped into the road, she'd swerved, and the SUV went off the shoulder. Then the seizure started. I called 911 while kneeling beside the little girl. Her name was Caitlin. I recognized the signs immediately, because Helen's younger brother had lived with epilepsy his entire life. Years ago, he taught me exactly what to do during a seizure. Don't restrain them. Keep them on their side. Protect their head. Stay calm even when everyone else is panicking. I eased Caitlin carefully out of the booster seat during a break in the convulsions, and laid my folded blazer beneath her head in the wet grass. Her mother kept apologizing like somehow the accident was her fault. "Hey," I told her quietly, "your little girl needs you calm right now. Breathe for me." So she tried. And that little girl fought her way through it. By the time the ambulance arrived, Caitlin's breathing had steadied, and the color had returned to her cheeks. One of the paramedics looked at me after hearing what happened and said something I still think about sometimes. "Most people keep driving." I didn't know what to say to that, because stopping never felt heroic to me. It just felt necessary. The ambulance left with Genevieve and Caitlin inside, lights disappearing into the dark Georgia highway, while I stayed behind waiting for the tow truck. That's when I finally noticed the blood on my shirt. Caitlin had cut her forehead during the crash. By the time everything was settled and I got back on the road, it was already pushing 9 o'clock. I tried calling Whitney twice, but the signal kept dropping. When I finally pulled into the Cloister, the valet looked at my old Buick like it had wandered in by mistake. Then he looked at me. Grass stains on my knees. Blood on my jacket. Hair windblown from the highway. The look on his face told me everything before he even spoke. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished marble and chandeliers. Every man wore a tuxedo. Every woman looked dipped in diamonds. And every head turned toward me. I found the ballroom easily enough. The second I stepped through those doors, conversation started dying table by table, not loudly, quietly, like candles blowing out one after another. Whitney rushed toward me first. "Oh my God, Hollis, what happened?" "There was an accident," I said. "A little girl." "Whitney!" her mother snapped sharply from across the room. That one word carried through the ballroom like a knife. Felicity Halverson Beauchamp stood near the stage in a champagne-colored gown, staring at me like I'd dragged mud across her living room carpet. Whitney tried explaining. He stopped to help somebody. But Felicity wasn't listening anymore. Her husband Carlton walked over with that polished doctor smile rich people wear when they want to remove a problem quietly. "Hollis," he said softly, gripping my elbow, "why don't we step outside for a moment?" I knew then exactly what was happening. Not one person asked if I was all right. Not one. Outside the ballroom, Carlton lowered his voice. "You understand this is a formal event. We have important guests here." "There was a child having a seizure on Highway 17, I told him. "Yes, and that's unfortunate," he replied carefully. "But you're covered in blood. Guests are becoming uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. That word sat in my chest harder than anger ever could. Whitney started crying immediately. Bradley looked frozen between us, caught between his father and the family he'd spent years trying to survive around. Then Carlton said the part I'll never forget. "Perhaps it would be best if you went home and we arranged another dinner later. Something casual." Something casual, like I was too embarrassing for the real occasion. Before anybody else could speak, resort security appeared at the end of the hallway. A tall man in a black suit with an earpiece. Polite, professional, humiliating. Whitney argued with her parents while Bradley stood there pale as paper, but I stopped them. "Let it go," I said quietly. I didn't want my son carrying that shame forever, so I walked myself out. The security guard followed 6 feet behind me all the way through the lobby anyway. I sat alone beside the fountain outside the resort, trying to steady my shaking hands before driving home. And that's when a black Suburban pulled into the circular driveway. Genevieve Ashworth stepped out, and the moment she saw the blood on my jacket, her entire expression changed. "What happened to you?" she asked. I gave a tired little shrug. "They preferred I wait outside." For a second she just stared at me. Then she looked toward the ballroom doors, and I watched something cold settle behind her eyes. "Come with me," she said. "If this story's hitting you in the heart so far, subscribe now, because what happened next changed every person in that ballroom forever." Genevieve walked me straight back into that ballroom, with one hand locked around my arm. The music stopped almost immediately. 300 wealthy guests turned to stare as we crossed the floor together. Felicity tried to speak first, but Genevieve cut through the room with a calm voice that somehow sounded louder than shouting. "My daughter could have died tonight." Silence. "She had a seizure after our accident on Highway 17. 27 cars drove past us." She rested her hand on my shoulder. "This man was the only person who stopped." You could feel the air change in the room. Genevieve told them everything. How I'd held Caitlin in the grass, how I'd kept her breathing steady until paramedics arrived, how I stayed behind to help after the ambulance left. Then she looked directly at Felicity and Carlton. "And after saving my child's life, your staff had him escorted out because he made your guests uncomfortable." Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their drinks. Then came the part that truly broke them. Genevieve explained that her foundation had been preparing to donate $9 million to fund the Halverson Beauchamp Pediatric Cardiac Wing at Memorial Hospital. "Not anymore," she said evenly. Carlton looked physically sick. Felicity's face lost every bit of color she had left. "My foundation invests in people," Genevieve continued. "Tonight I learned exactly who you are when nobody important is watching." Beside me, Bradley started crying. Not quietly either. The kind of crying a grown man does when years of guilt finally crack open all at once. "Pop," he whispered, "I'm sorry." Whitney took my arm immediately. "We're leaving with you," she said without hesitation. And we did. The 4 of us walked out together, while the entire ballroom sat frozen in silence. A month later, Caitlin mailed me a drawing of me holding her hand in green grass beneath a bright blue sky. At the top she wrote, "Thank you, Mr. Hollis, you are my hero." I framed it beside my kitchen window, where the cardinals still gather every morning. Because sometimes the room you spend your whole life trying to enter was never the place you belonged at all.